She came to watch her son graduate. Until the base was under attack, ma'am, the family's seating area is back through the gate. This section is restricted personnel only. I don't know who told you this was appropriate, but whoever it was did you a real disservice. The words cut through the morning air at Fort Bliss like a blade scraping across cold metal. Colonel Raymond Garrett didn't lower his voice. He didn't try to. 63 people stood in formation on the parade ground behind him, officers in dress blues, base instructors with clipboards tucked under their arms, maintenance crew who'd paused mid-task when the sedan pulled up. The West Texas sun was already fierce at 0847, cutting hard shadows across the bleached concrete. The smell of cordite and engine oil drifted from the training bays to the north. Somewhere in the motor pool, a diesel engine turned and refused to catch. The woman standing beside the sedan didn't move. She was 32, maybe 33. Plain khaki slacks, a collared linen shirt, pale blue, the kind that tells you nothing, hair pulled back in a regulation bun so precise it bordered on institutional. No rank insignia, no service pin, no lanyard. She carried a single manila folder and a bottle of water, and she was looking past Garrett at the parade ground the way someone looks at a thing they've looked at 100 times before. She didn't look up. She didn't flinch. "Sweetheart." Garrett stepped closer. His shadow fell across her shoes. "I said this area is for base personnel. The graduation stands are that way." He pointed. Behind him, a handful of junior officers exchanged looks. Someone stifled a laugh. Garrett's chest ribbons caught the sun, 4 rows of them, arranged with the particular precision of a man who wants you to count them. He stood with his arms crossed like he owned not just this base, but every base the Army had ever built on the western half of the continent. She looked at him then. Brown eyes. Calm. The kind of calm that doesn't come from composure training. The kind that comes from having been in rooms much worse than this one. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, Colonel. Not aggressive. Just there." Garrett's jaw tightened. He turned to his aide, a young captain named Whitfield, who had the expression of a man witnessing something he couldn't categorize. "Find out who authorized a civilian to park in restricted access." She had already returned to the folder. In the far corner of the parade ground, partially shaded by the edge of the observation post, a man stood alone. Master Sergeant Leon Briggs, 61 years old, 34 years of service, currently assigned as the base's senior range instructor. He had not moved when the sedan pulled up. He had not laughed when Garrett made his first comment. He had simply watched. His eyes had gone to her hands the moment she stepped out of the car. The way she held the folder, left hand, low grip, body angled slightly away from the vehicle. Eyes already cataloging the space before her feet were fully on the ground. Briggs knew that posture. Had seen it at SEER training. Had seen it at language schools that weren't in any public directory. His pen had stopped moving. He watched her turn back to her folder with the stillness of someone who has decided, categorically, that this situation does not require her attention. Something about this woman. He couldn't place it. But it was there. By 0920, the story had traveled. It moved the way stories move on bases, through the informal channels that matter more than any official communication, through group chats on personal phones, through the mess hall line, where 2 first lieutenants were already describing it with embellishments neither of them had witnessed, through the admin building, where a sergeant first class told the version where Garrett had actually escorted her back to the family gate himself, which hadn't happened. The woman, no one had gotten her name, which was itself a kind of story, was apparently still on the parade ground. Sitting on the concrete steps of the eastern observation post, folder open across her knees, writing something by hand. Garrett had returned once to confirm she'd moved. She hadn't. He was not a man accustomed to being ignored. 22 years of service, a combat deployment to Afghanistan, 2 administrative postings that had earned him a reputation for efficiency, and a secondary reputation, quieter and less official, for being the kind of officer who expected his rank to do the work his personality sometimes couldn't. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had learned over many years that authority worked best when it was never questioned, when the system held its shape. He didn't like things that didn't hold their shape. At 0933, he sent Whitfield to collect her credentials for formal verification. She handed over a single card. White background, no photograph, a series of numbers that meant nothing to Whitfield, who was 27 and had never seen that particular format before. He brought it back to Garrett. Garrett looked at it for 4 seconds, then looked up. "Get me the provost marshal." In the observation post, she controlled her breathing. 4 in, hold 4. 4 out, hold 4. The concrete was warm through her slacks. The sound of the graduation rehearsal drifted from the far end of the parade ground, boots in unison, a band running through a passage they hadn't gotten clean yet. Somewhere in that formation was her son. 22 years old. First Lieutenant Daniel Vasquez, graduating from the Army's Advanced Special Operations Pipeline at 1400 hours. She had driven 9 hours to be here. She opened the second page of the folder. The first competence clue had come at 0911, when 2 base technicians had needed to access the communications array on the eastern wall. One of them, trying to navigate the monthly authentication portal on the secured terminal, had been cycling through the verification steps for 4 minutes when she'd walked past, glanced at the screen, reached over without breaking stride, and input a 12-character authentication code in under 8 seconds. The technician had stared at the screen. How did you? She was already past him. Briggs had been 20 feet away. His pen had stopped again. The second clue came at 0941. Garrett's provost marshal, a hard-faced major named Tolliver, arrived with 2 MPs and asked her to stand for a formal credential review. She stood. She put the folder on the step. She stood with her feet at exactly shoulder width, hands clasped at the small of her back, eyes forward. Not approximately regulation, exactly regulation. The kind of exactly that was drilled into a body over years until it happened without thought. Even in a linen shirt and khaki slacks on a concrete step on a morning when she had come to watch her son graduate. Tolliver noticed it. He did not say anything about it. "Name," he said. "Elena Vasquez." "Affiliation?" "I'm here for the graduation ceremony. Your access card shows a classification designation I'm not authorized to verify on base. I need to know who issued this. That information is above your clearance level, Major." Tolliver's face cycled through 2 things at once: irritation and something that wasn't quite uncertainty, but was trying to become it. "Ma'am, that's not how this works. I know how it works." 3 words. Then she picked up her folder. The third clue happened by accident. One of the MPs, a young specialist named Torres, was carrying a disassembled M110 sniper rifle in a hard case to the armory for a post-training inspection. The case latch gave on the steps, and the components shifted. He made a grab for them, the kind of grab that would have sent the bolt assembly to the concrete. Her hand was already there. She caught it without looking. Set it back in the case. Her grip on the components, the angle of her wrists, the automatic index of her fingers, made Torres go still. He'd been through 3 cycles of advanced marksmanship training. He'd never seen a grip like that outside of sniper school. He looked at her. She handed him the case. "Watch the latch," she said. He nodded. He said nothing. She controls her breathing. 4 in, hold 4. 4 out, hold 4. Garrett returned at 10:27. He had a different quality to his voice now. Not less confident, but performing confidence with slightly more effort. The way a man performs it when something has shifted beneath him and he hasn't identified what. He brought Tolliver with him and 2 additional officers, and he stood in front of her with his arms crossed and delivered what he clearly intended to be a definitive statement. "Miss Vasquez, I've made several attempts to accommodate your presence here as a courtesy given the graduation event. You've refused to comply with credential verification. You've accessed a restricted terminal without authorization. And you're in a designated restricted zone without valid clearance documentation I can confirm. I have the authority to detain you for a formal security review. I don't want to do that on today of all days. But if you continue to refuse cooperation, I haven't refused cooperation. Ma'am, you asked for my credential card. I gave it to you. You asked my name. I gave it to you. You asked my affiliation. I told you." She closed the folder. "What I will not do is explain my clearance designation to personnel who don't have access to that designation. That's not non-cooperation. That's operational security. You know what operational security is." Garrett's face went a particular kind of still. From the observation post corner, Briggs watched Garrett's hands. They had uncrossed. That was the tell. "Detain her," Garrett said. Briggs made a decision. He walked to the edge of the formation, close enough to Tolliver to speak quietly. "I'd be careful here." Tolliver looked at him. "What?" "I'm just saying." Briggs looked at the woman, who was standing with her hands clasped at the small of her back, exactly regulation, watching Garrett with no expression at all. "I'd be very careful about this one." Tolliver shook his head and followed Garrett toward the holding facility. Briggs stayed where he was. He pulled out his phone and made a call he should have made 20 minutes ago. The holding room was 11 feet by 9 feet. Concrete walls. Metal bench along the north face. A single window near the ceiling that showed nothing but sky and the occasional contrail. The smell of industrial disinfectant failing to cover something older underneath. Sweat. Stress. Years of anxious occupants who'd sat exactly where she was sitting. She sat with her back straight. Folder on her knees. She had asked once whether her son had been notified. She was told that was not their concern. She had not asked again. This is the near-fail moment, the point where anyone watching from the outside would think she's finished. Detained, credentials pulled. A civilian woman with no apparent rank and no apparent authority sitting on a metal bench, while a colonel with 4 rows of ribbons files the paperwork to make her disappear from this base before her son's name gets called at 1400. Except there is no such thing as an unmonitored absence in her world. The people who monitor her absence don't wear army dress blues. Her watch read 10:49. In 17 minutes, her missed check-in would register at a facility in Virginia that she was not going to name in this holding room or any other room. That facility had a protocol for missed check-ins. The protocol was not a phone call. In 54 minutes, an automated security flag she had set manually on her own Access Credentials 36 hours ago would trigger a secondary alert at a different location. This one had direct communication lines she had tested personally. In approximately 2 hours and 11 minutes, Colonel Raymond Garrett was going to learn the difference between the rank he could see and the authority he couldn't. She controlled her breathing. 4 in, hold 4. 4 out, hold 4. She opened the folder to the 3rd page. She had work to do. At 11:04, Briggs reached someone he hadn't spoken to in 6 years. The call lasted 45 seconds. He didn't go back inside. He stood in the motor pool shadow and waited. He'd been in the army long enough to know what kind of silence came before certain kinds of arrivals. He'd seen it once in Kandahar and once in a hotel lobby in Seoul that he was not supposed to discuss. He recognized the quality of what was building. The air had a particular texture. Things were about to move quickly and then be very, very still. At 11:31, Whitfield knocked on Garrett's office door and said there were vehicles at the main gate. Garrett looked up from his desk. What kind of vehicles? Whitfield had the expression of a man who had not been in the army long enough to have developed a vocabulary for what he had just seen. Pentagon plates, sir, and, he paused, 2 unmarked Suburbans. Garrett put down his pen. By the time he reached the gate, 4 officers in service dress had already cleared security. 2 of them he recognized by face. Generals he had seen in briefings and photographs, and once at a ceremony in Washington that he still considered one of the highest moments of his career. They were not in the habit of making unscheduled appearances at Fort Bliss on graduation morning. They walked with a kind of purpose that suggested this was not a social visit. Not nearly. Behind them, 2 federal agents in suits were already speaking with the gate sergeant. Garrett approached. He opened his mouth. The first general, Hargrove, 3 stars, Army G3, looked at him the way a man looks at a door he's about to walk through. Where is she? It was not a question. Garrett said, "There's been a security review situation involving an unverified. Where is she?" The holding facility was 400 meters from the main gate. They covered it in under 3 minutes. Briggs fell in at the back of the group without being asked and without being told to stop. Nobody told him to stop. The door opened. She was sitting exactly as she had been, back straight, folder on her knees, window showing sky. She looked up at the door and then at Hargrove, and then back at the door with the expression of someone who had been expecting this arrival and was verifying that it had occurred within the projected window. "You're 11 minutes early," she said. Hargrove said, "Traffic," something almost warm crossed his face. Then it was gone. Official again. He turned to Garrett. "Who ordered the detention?" Garrett said. "I did, sir. Under my authority as base commander, pending credential, you detained a classified red personnel asset. On a base she was authorized to access by authorization codes that predate your assignment here by 4 years. Your provost marshal ran those codes through a verification system he doesn't have clearance to access, which triggered a secondary flag, which triggered this." Hargrove's voice was even. It was more frightening for being even. "Colonel, you have spent the last 2 hours detaining the woman who is responsible for the operational intelligence that kept 6 of your men alive in Mosul in 2019. Among other things. Among many other things." The room had gone very quiet. One of the federal agents had moved to Garrett's left without Garrett noticing him do it. Briggs, standing at the door, watched Elena Vasquez set the folder on the bench beside her, stand up, and adjust the collar of her linen shirt. Her movements were measured, not rushed, not triumphant. The movements of someone returning to work. "I need to see my son's graduation," she said. "I drove 9 hours." Hargrove said, "Yes, ma'am." Then he raised his hand. The salute was slow and deliberate, the kind that is not a reflex but a choice, each degree of movement carrying the weight of what it means, performed in front of 63 base personnel and 4 general officers and 2 federal agents and a holding room that smelled of disinfectant and something older. The second general's hand came up, the third, the fourth, the federal agents, The aide. Whitfield, who didn't fully understand what was happening but understood enough, his hand moving to his temple with the automaticity of a man who recognizes on some cellular level the shape of what is in front of him. Tolliver, standing in the hallway, rigid, saluting. Torres, the specialist who had caught the rifle component, had appeared at the edge of the corridor. His hand came up before he'd consciously decided to raise it. Briggs, at the door, had already been saluting for several seconds. He wasn't one of the ones who needed the briefing to know. He'd known since 0911, when she'd input 12 characters in 8 seconds at a terminal he'd heard about twice in 30 years. Once from a warrant officer who'd been there, and once from a man who'd trained the people who built it. The room held. Garrett's face cycled through a sequence no drama training produces. Surprise moving into the dawning, terrible recognition of a man who has understood not just what he did, but why it was worse than rudeness, worse than arrogance, worse than a professional error. He had tried to remove a woman from a base she had been authorized to access, in a career built on missions he would never be briefed on, to protect operations that had kept people alive in rooms where his clearance level did not reach the floor. His hand came up. Slow, the slowest one. The one that cost something. Elena Vasquez looked at him when he did it. Not with satisfaction. Not with anger, with the expression of a woman who has already filed this moment, cataloged it, and moved on to the next problem on the list. She returned the salutes. General Hargrove turned to the federal agent. The agent nodded. He produced a document and placed it in Tolliver's hands. Tolliver read the first paragraph and looked up with an expression that was trying not to show the extent of his horror. The formal investigation would take 11 days. The records Garrett had accessed without authorization. The communications intercepts his personnel had attempted when running the verification. The breach of a protected credential sequence. These were not minor items. They were the kind of items that ended assignments and redirected careers toward administrative postings in places with no parade grounds and no ribbon ceremonies. Garrett was escorted to his office to begin that process. He did not say anything on the way. Elena Vasquez picked up her folder from the bench. She checked her watch. 11:52 hours. The graduation began at 1400. She had time to find a seat. She walked out of the holding room and into the West Texas morning. Briggs fell into step beside her. Not escorting, just walking in the same direction. He had 34 years of practice walking beside people without being asked. After 20 steps, he said the authentication code. She said nothing. I saw it done once, at a school that isn't in any directory I've ever been handed. He looked straight ahead. Heard the woman who taught it had a call sign nobody used out loud. Protocol was to refer to her by position only. She kept walking. Program 11, he said. She stopped. She looked at him. Really looked at him. Something shifted behind her eyes, the first thing that had shifted all morning, the first departure from the absolute controlled stillness. And it was not triumph, and it was not recognition. It was something quieter. The look of a person who has spent a very long time being unseen by the right people and has just been seen by one of them. You were at Pendleton, she said. 2007, Briggs's jaw tightened. A veteran's involuntary salute, not the hand, but the body, the way a career makes its mark on muscle and bone. Yes, ma'am. You knew the instructors. I knew the program. He paused. I knew what it cost. She looked at him for another moment. Then she started walking again. His salute came from his side, not his temple. Not regulation. Something older. Something that said, I know what you are. I knew it before anyone told me. I am choosing this. She acknowledged it with a nod that was barely a nod. They walked toward the parade ground. At 1400, First Lieutenant Daniel Vasquez crossed the stage and received his commission. His mother watched from the family's seating area, not because she had been directed there, but because she had chosen it. She sat in the third row. Plain khaki slacks, pale blue collar shirt, a manila folder on her lap. When his name was called, she did not cry. She sat very still, watching her son's face as he turned to find her in the crowd. And when he found her, something crossed his expression that had no military vocabulary. Just a son looking at his mother. Just that. After the ceremony, she walked with him to the courtyard, where families milled with their graduates in the particular happy chaos of endings and beginnings. He had grown since January. She noticed that, the way a mother notices. She held his face in her hands for 3 seconds and said nothing, which was everything. They sat on a bench in the shade. She told him she'd had some trouble getting onto the base. He looked at her with the expression of a man who knows his mother and knows what trouble means when she uses that word in that tone. "How much trouble?" he asked. "It's sorted," she said. He looked at her a moment longer. Then he laughed. Not the kind of laugh that invites everyone else to join in, the private kind. The kind that says, "I know you and I have always known you, and I will always be slightly amazed by you." She put the folder in her bag. Justice isn't loud. It's patient. They walked to the car together. The West Texas afternoon painted long shadows across the parade ground. Her watch read 15:23 hours. Somewhere in a federal building in Virginia, 2 investigations had been opened. 3 others were already moving. Garrett's career had entered the stage where men discover that authority has a structure below the one they can see, and that structure has no patience for the kind of errors he had made this morning. She did not think about that. She thought about the drive. She thought about where they'd stop for dinner. She thought about the name at the bottom of page 4 of the folder. The name she hadn't gotten to yet. The one that connected to a surveillance intercept from a rooftop in Aleppo, 2021, that no one had been able to source. Someone had been watching an asset extraction from that rooftop. Someone with equipment that didn't match any profile in the classified registry. Someone was still out there. The folder was in her bag. Tomorrow brought new ghosts to hunt. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to MVP Stories for more.